Welcome back to Cut the Chat Life Science Insider. This week's episode is hosted by Seuss Plus CEO and co-founder Kieran Canisius.
So today we have an exceptional guest, one I'm so excited about, and mainly because of the journey we've been on together and the up close and personal observations I've been able to have together with our guest on the need for grit, resilience in the journey of clinical development in biotech, and specifically in a challenging area, neurodegenerative disease. Happy to invite Limor Ben Har and to welcome you today. Limor is a Chief Operating Officer at Prilenia Therapeutics, a biotech who has focused its energy, its passion, its dedication to Huntington's disease, ALS, and improving the lives of patients and loved ones dealing with these nasty diseases. And what I have been so impressed with over the last 5 years is the amount of curveballs, the amount of challenges, and the exceptional strength and that word grit or resilience that we talk a lot about, but we don't talk a lot about in terms of in the middle of the process. We end up talking about the good things that happened, the funding that was raised, the first patients included, the last patients' last visits, the database locks, the approvals. We talk about the highlights, but we don't always talk about when we've scraped our knees or run into challenges or environmental changes that have directly impacted the success or the need to keep going. So Limor, I welcome you. I'm so happy to have you here because I have been honored to be able to witness that journey, be a part of that journey in some places with you, and in others, just a very big, strong cheerleader in your path. So welcome.
Thank you, Kieran. It's such a pleasure to finally do this conversation together. As you mentioned, I really remember when we started working together back in the early days of 2020, or the crazy 2020 that we may come back to talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to this conversation and how it turns out.
Great. So my first question is actually, so we talk a lot about the journey of development of an asset in the biotech world, right? And we talk about inflection points to inflection points and getting a product to market. But there's always a journey that got you there or got all the individuals in this industry. And I think it's really interesting to hear, what was your journey up until the point you joined Prilenia?
That's a great question, and partly because my background is really not the typical how people typically get into biotech or the life science industry, I would say. I started my career actually in a very different field, in foreign policy, national security, and government. What I loved about that was the ability to work on strategy, on planning and operations, and figuring out what needs to be done and then drive things through. And at some point, I decided to check where else I can apply those kind of activities or those kind of passions of mine, and looked for other things. So I actually completely serendipitously ended up at Teva Pharmaceuticals. That's back in 2013. The Teva team back in the day that included Michael Hayden, who is currently the CEO of Prilenia Therapeutics, and we'll mention him also later on, took a chance on someone who comes from government and the ability to actually apply some of the learnings from government into big pharma. And I ended in a position of business operations within Teva R&D, which was a pretty large organization, and fell in love with the team, with the field, with the passion it entails, the ability to actually drive towards making real impact on people who really need it. So the whole notion that, in our industry sometimes becomes too cliche of the real unmet need in the patient's lives. And I really fell in love with that and with what I can do to help things forward. And I spent about 5 years at Teva. We worked on many things, had to go through also ups and downs on a larger pipeline, but other difficulties. And Teva itself ran into some financial difficulties that are no secret to anybody in 2017. And at that point, had to actually shelf a few products At the time, I was chief of staff of the R&D organization. It was a global, we were about 2,000 people at the time, global organization. We had to shelve a few pipeline products that we were still very excited about. And one of the things that Teva did that I think is very respectful is the openness to actually find new homes for these drug candidates and not just let them, stay in the doghouse for too long. And there were actually 3 companies that started out of that. That's 89 Bio, there's Klexo Biosciences, and Prilenia Therapeutics.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege of taking the drug candidate pridopidine, which is the drug candidate Prilenia has been built around, and developing it further, taking it to the next steps in its clinical development for both Huntington disease and later on also ALS, and just driving that through, building a company around it. And that's really what we're talking about today.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting in an industry, and especially small biotech, small pharma, where a lot of strength is visualized in a very specific background. So a medical background, a scientific background. We definitely love our key opinion leaders and our in-depth experts, right? And I think what you are just explaining is actually what, in this case, Michael, but also you recognized in trying a completely different industry, how to get through an executional phase, right? Clinical development, in essence, is defining a strategy and then executing to it as focused and rigid as you can. But that doesn't mean you always a specific pedigree, right? It doesn't always mean that. And I think that's been visible in the last 5 years, that Prilenia originally, but also in the recent times, that bringing a different expertise actually brings a different strength as well, and a different focus and rigor. And definitely seen that as well, as I'm sure you have stories of things that surprised you in clinical development in general, drug development. But now we're in 2025. And in 2025, you announced a partnership with FAIR, which is very exciting and is a very positive development and milestone. And that's one of the highs, right? One of the ones we talked about. But I know over the last 5 years, many different things have happened. And you yourself, as COO of Prilenia, have had to make adaptations in the company, in your strategies, and taken action. So I'm going to read the question because I think the question's good, and I'm afraid I'm going to botch it up. So we know that neurodegenerative disease area is challenging. Many different disease areas have their own challenges, by the way, recognizing that from being an agnostic in this area. But neurodegenerative is a minefield for R&D. I was curious, what actions have you guys taken specifically over the past few years to navigate in this space, in the neurodegenerative area?
That's again a great question. I think that one of the things that drives us is that real unmet need in the neurodegenerative space and the passion to actually tackle an insurmountable problem, and working for these rare diseases. In our case, it's the first ones are Huntington disease and ALS, and just driving through that, dealing with all the difficulties. I think we've been trying to find the best way to overcome challenges in how you can do effective clinical trials in this space.
Yeah.
We face the same challenges that everybody else faces, and we always try to get through and overcome them with the science and with our passion, through involving both the experts and the community, and through involving the patient voice and the patient community as well, trying to get to the best way to drive things forward, and finding a way forward. And I think, you mentioned that we're now at a point of a high, and I think it's important to say that it definitely hasn't always been like that. When we started, it was a different situation. We had to take this product. It was 5 of us. We had to build the company, and doing it almost from scratch with a lot of help. Teva supported and helped in the beginning of getting the handoff and throughout with things that we needed. But it was us with our initial seed investor, from Talisman Capital back in the US. And we embarked relatively quickly, within a few months, on a fundraising activity. And actually, that took a very, very long time. Initially, when we met with potential investors, and I think we met with a lot. When we just met with those initial investors, that was in the hype, or the biggest hype, of gene therapy and ASOs. And people looked at us and they said, why would you continue to develop small molecules? There's no, future for small molecules in this space in Huntington disease. And that, we had to hear a lot of no's, also meetings with investors where you feel like everything is great, and actually the no comes really quickly, but get through that and continue, because we really believe in the potential of this drug to make an impact and in the need to do that. So, but it took a lot. And then we secured our first Series A funding, which enabled us to add Forbion, that has also had like its own journey, I think, since 2020. But add them as a lead investor, and starting a syndicate around that with really great investors that allowed us to also build a good board. The funny thing happened is that when we were about to close that financing, it was March of 2020, and Michael Hayden, who was our CEO, and I were basically supposed to go on our way to a flight to the Netherlands when the quarantine started in Europe. So decided to cancel the flight last minute, and actually did our last piece of due diligence from home, for that matter. We were together and not in the same space, but to do this virtually, which was the kind of the first step to do that, because until then all those meetings were in person, all those meetings with the investors, and then had to go through closing a financing during the outbreak, starting a trial during the outbreak, dealing with all of that, figuring out how you start a trial in a completely unknown situation, and handling that risk and running through. Then having to go through all of that, I think we also ran into some, the difficulties that everybody in the drug development field goes through. So here is things in the clinical trials that you need to deal with. There, it's interaction that comes in, that things that we didn't think about that we needed to do. And then even our results, the initial results we had were actually in ALS, and as part of the ALS Healy platform trial, which was also a great project we probably don't have time to talk too much about today. But the results from there also came in, and you have to figure out, okay, what do you see? What happens there? And what can you take? Is there enough there to take the drug forward? And I think through the persistence and ability to just focus, dig deep, and not just give up with the initial bad news you see in anything, has helped us looking and very methodically, and I think through the science, finding explanations for what we see, and what are the learnings we can then apply and go forward with that. So had to go through that a lot, and throughout the years, I have countless examples of that.
Yeah. So it is the intersection, right, of the financial, the scientific, also the political, in your case, and in all of our cases, all of those impacts and how they all intersect to be able to continue the growth of an organization, or the development of an organization, to get an asset to actually the patients and the loved ones that we're trying to do. It can be a minefield. And outside of driving focus, excellence, execution, not being deterred, there's moments where in those, let's say, last 5 years, you are constantly asked, so what is the new direction? Or what are we going to do with strategy? And these shifts, because of the environmental changes and this intersection of all of these different changes that were, in some cases, unexpected, COVID, and the actually financial evolution over the last few years has been interesting. So how have you adapted your strategy, can be organizational or clinical development strategies, to changing biotech or political or commercial landscapes? How have you done that over the last 5 years with, I think, pretty significant changes that we've seen?
Yeah. So I think that it's a strength of ours, I think, as a company and as a team, to identify the moments where we need to adapt and actually do that pretty quickly. Our ability to to be agile. I mean, we're small and mighty, as we said at the beginning. I mean, not as small anymore. I think we grew to about 45 now. So, 9x over the years, but it's still to have that mindset of, okay, you see something, you go through, right? You go through the tension, and you in order to overcome it. I think are focused on finding, just analyzing the situation and figuring it out and then adapting. I think it's part of our deep culture, and I think that we've been able to build a team that also has those capabilities and are able to handle uncertainty and actually embrace it, and are not deterred by it, and are not deterred by the need to change. It's something that we put an emphasis on also when in the hiring process, which I think is really critical. And yes, you have to adapt all the time. I think it's in biotech. By the way, I think it's in every field, but definitely in the biotech space, which is a whole different level of a roller coaster. I think that we all need to go through. And so it's the ability to, like, okay, now you're in a high, now you're in a low, and just you go through it and adapt. I think we've been fortunate that we have the team that we have to do that. And in our field of biotech, typically people say, yeah, in high tech it's mostly people and a little bit of the technology, and in biotech it's all the technology and a little bit of the people. And I think it's not exactly the case. It's the people really make a difference. And I think without our team, a lot of other teams would have given up, and a lot of other teams may have not been able to, like, withstand all the shifts and changes and all the challenges. And sometimes you go through it, like, you need to just face adversary and just deal with that. I think we have a strong team that, yes, as you mentioned, had to face some challenging situations. We have a team in Israel, myself included, where in October 7th we were just working on very important elements of our regulatory strategy at the time on Huntington disease, where the war started, and we never missed a beat. And it's a crazy thing to even think of, where we have a team that deals with a lot of both anxiety and tragedy all around, and still are so determined and passionate about what we do and what we're trying to do for the community that we're trying to serve.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And as I said, I've had the privilege to be a partner on that journey. So I know quite a bit of the insides and quite a bit of the passion and the drive of the individuals. And what I would also say is the respect of the different expertises and lack of fear to run into friction, to say, but I don't agree. This is not because you are focused on the humans and the people, the patients and their loved ones, that you avoid driving into the things that are difficult or are uncomfortable. The environment is making things uncomfortable, and the resilience, part of that resilience is also going through difficult situations together. That doesn't always mean agreeing. We've had the same, right? And I think that's some of it is, we're going to get through this. This is what needs to be done, because there's a laser focus on why you're doing something together. And I would 100% agree with that. And that a resilience and grit has been beautiful to watch, because you were right. It is not just the one thing. It is not just the data, just the science, it is a complex interaction of multiple things. And I would agree that the individuals in that, the people in that, are as crucial. And maybe not a 50-50 balance, but pretty close, in order to find success, not only to find evaluation, right? So I have one more question. We're looking back. So one of the things that we were just talking about is the why, right? And one of the things that can be quite, I don't know if I could call it irritating. I think it's kind of irritating is that we spend in this industry lots of time talking about things, but not actually acting in that way. So patient-centric is a great example. And I really think that the big evolution has been taken in the last few years. I see the dedication and the determination. But with the complexity of financial, political, regulatory challenges, we also do forget sometimes the why, the patients, the loved ones. And last week, one of another client of ours has posted something about their cystic fibrosis study. And it reminded me that what we're doing is helping patients breathe. And then I thought, oh God, it's helping a mother hug their children. And it's just a big reminder that sometimes we forget in the daily, right? So what I think would be great for our listeners is to hear the engagement of patients and families and their loved ones in the R&D process. And because I've seen your uniqueness or your strength, the dedication, the reminders, the pulling this group closer and understanding why this is so important and what is needed. What impact has that had on Prilenia's development path, your strategy, your approach? Is this patient-centric and loved ones-centric approach? What was that impact?
Yeah, so I think this probably starts before Prilenia. And I think, I mentioned Michael, our CEO. He has been working on Huntington disease for so many years, just starting when, in his medical school days, basically in South Africa, working with those families of Huntington disease, which is a devastating disease that affects whole families, sometimes called the worst disease known to men because of so many impacts that it has on the individuals and on their family, and children that are no longer children having to take care of parents and knowing that they may have the same fate as their parents. So I think when I joined the Teva days, and Michael first brought Huntington disease to Teva. And by the way, the drug, there's another drug that Teva later marketed for Huntington disease, Austedo, that it was also part of that journey. And that sentiment was so ingrained in our team that this is what we built on. And when the initial team of Prilenia came out of that Teva R&D team initially, that is what we brought us together and just kept going. And I think we've always been close to the patient community and to the Huntington community, and then later on the ALS community as well. And we continue to do that. And I think it's so much of how we are that it's tough to say, oh, what impact did it have? Because all that we are is that. So I feel that it's such a big part of who we are that it's hard to separate.
Yeah, it is. Right? Yeah. It just is. Yeah. It's part of your guiding light. It leads not every, but a lot of decisions, and therefore makes it also even more worth fighting for. And almost could be even one of the reasons why the resilience and the strength and the ability to get back up and move forward is so powerful within Prilenia. And you see a bit less of the volatility that you would see with other companies who have a great career or are interested in the science, but perhaps don't have the strong why and the connection to the patients that stems from, indeed, Michael, but is 100% throughout your company, and something that I've seen you remind your colleagues as well. It's good to see. So, but one of the fun things about resilience is that in the moment you need it the most, you feel it the least, right? The scraped knees, the broken teeth, the getting up again, we're fine feeling of leadership when it may not be fine. This is a setback. This is painful. The lockdown at that moment wasn't painful. The anxiety was big. The dealing with the output of the data, the top line results, the path forward from there, the moment that actually you yourself and your colleagues, how safe are you? How much are we going to be able to continue just because of a political big issue that is big on a personal life? And now we see it in the US, political changes that are also creating a lot of sense of lack of safety or predictability. So if you could go back anytime in the last 5 years, any moment in time, when you needed the most resilience for whatever reason, what would that moment be that you would go back to yourself for 5 minutes? And what would you say? So what moment and what would you say?
Yeah, it's a great and a tough question, I think, because on our journey, we're never the same, and I think that our experiences in general shape us. So typically, people say, "Oh, would you go back to any point?" I'm like, no, because then I wouldn't be who I am. So, but I think that, as you mentioned, yes, even though when looking back, we can see how we overcame the challenges, it doesn't take away from how hard they were, or in some cases still are. I think to just there were maybe 2 points, personally that I would go through is, I mean, yes, the COVID days, of at some point it was just like, are we even going to get this through? Is there going to be a clinical trial that starts, and then it was a crazy world. It's just crazy. So just to see, what, after, usually when there's a crisis, in the end, you do get through some new equilibrium, but we can get through it. I think if you go to that, you go to October 7th, or to the results, or now, like, with with everything that's going on, I would say on the global level or in our industry level, I think when you're in like the middle of it and in the middle of the storm, it's very tough. But at some point, things, we're humans, so we adapt to everything. So that's how we're built. I think that's just to remind even myself that at every step of the way. Like, we'll find a way and just get through it and do it together. And so all those points where this happened, and we had those difficulties that we had to face, and just remind ourselves of that, because every time we're like, oh, this is really bad, and again, at that moment, it's tough to see how you get to the light. It's more like knowing that we will somehow.
So not sugarcoating the fact that it is difficult, that it's going to take a hard day's work, using your words. I would add to embrace the friction if needed, respect the expertise you have around you, and keep going. And all along with that focus of the why you're doing it. Thank you so much, Limor. It has been a huge pleasure to have this podcast together. I look forward to many more of these conversations in the future. And for all of our listeners, please do subscribe. Feel free to listen to all of our other podcasts as well. And thank you again, Limor, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Kieran. It was a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Cut the Chat Life Science Insider. Make sure you're following SUS Plus on LinkedIn and be the first to know about upcoming podcasts.